What if I told you that the financial system running your life today was never designed for you? That the value of your money, the rise and fall of nations, and even the boom and bust cycles of the global economy were engineered, not by chance, but by design. And at the very center of that design stood only a handful of families. These were not politicians, not kings, but bankers, traders, and financiers who understood one thing better than anyone else: control the money, and you control the world. Before we go any deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching this from. I want to know how far this story reaches, because what you're about to hear connects every single one of us. The story of how a few families designed the global financial trap begins not in modern times, but centuries ago, in the age of kings, wars, and empires. It's the story of how wealth quietly shifted from royal crowns to private hands, and how those hands built a system that still decides who wins and who loses today. But to understand that, we have to go back to where money itself changed forever. In the 1600s, Europe was on fire. Endless wars drained the treasuries of empires. Kings needed gold, armies needed pay. But there was one problem: the crown was always broke. That's when a new class of people stepped in, the private financiers. They didn't fight wars, they funded them. And in return, they earned something far more powerful than royal favor: interest. It began with small loans. But soon, the world discovered a revolutionary idea. Money could be created, not mined. Private banks realized they could lend far more money than they physically had in gold, because not everyone would withdraw their gold at once. This practice, called fractional reserve banking, was the seed of a system that would eventually control nations. By the 18th century, families who mastered this system became more powerful than the monarchs themselves. They could start wars, end them, and fund both sides at the same time. One banker once said, "I care not who makes the laws, if I can control the money supply." That statement wasn't arrogance. It was a blueprint. As Europe expanded, so did these financial families. They operated quietly behind governments, funding exploration, colonization, and war. They understood something revolutionary. Power doesn't need to sit on a throne. It can sit in a bank vault. From London to Amsterdam, Vienna to Paris, a network of private banking houses began forming. They lent money to kings, built stock exchanges, and issued government bonds. These weren't just financial instruments, they were chains, because every government that borrowed became a debtor, and debt is control. By the 1800s, this web of control became global. The world was now being run, not by empires of land, but empires of credit. And these empires had names. You've probably heard some of them whispered in documentaries, conspiracy theories, or dusty history books. But this isn't about names. It's about the system they built, a system that survives under new names even today. Let's pause and ask, how do you trap the entire world financially? You make them depend on something you can control. For centuries, gold was money. It was tangible, limited, and impossible to print. But gold had one problem for the banking elite. It couldn't be multiplied at will. So came the next great innovation: paper money, a promise written on a note saying it could be exchanged for gold someday. Except that someday quietly disappeared. As long as people believed in the paper, it worked. And when nations began printing more paper than gold they had, a new form of invisible wealth was born: inflation. Now, instead of earning money by creating real value, governments and banks could create money itself, and the families who controlled that system could loan it, charge interest on it, and expand it infinitely. This was the moment the trap began tightening, because every dollar created came with a built-in debt, and that debt could never truly be repaid. What started as private banking had now evolved into national central banking. But don't be fooled. These national banks were often privately influenced, guided by the same philosophy that began centuries ago: By the 20th century, the system had matured. Wars, recessions, and industrial revolutions gave banks the perfect excuse to expand control through debt. World War I, World War II. Each crisis led to massive government borrowing, mostly from central banks. And guess who held the real power now? The lenders. They didn't need armies. They had compound interest. After the wars, the victors sat down to reshape the world's economy, and the modern financial order was born. One meeting in particular, Bretton Woods, 1944, changed everything. The US dollar became the global reserve currency, backed by gold. At least that's what they said. But decades later, even that final connection to gold was severed. Now, money wasn't real. It was debt, backed by confidence. And confidence could be managed through media, markets, and manipulation. The families and institutions that understood this controlled the levers of global trade, interest rates, and national debt. So here we are, living inside a system where every loan, every mortgage, every credit card, and every national budget traces back to that same original idea, money as a tool of control. In Part 2, we'll uncover how this system evolved into a global financial network, how modern banking, corporations, and even digital currencies all serve the same structure, and what it means for your financial freedom today. By the end of the 20th century, the world's financial system had become one giant web of debt, connecting governments, corporations, and ordinary people, all through invisible strings. But the truth is, this wasn't a random outcome. It was the logical result of a design that started centuries ago and quietly adapted with every crisis. As economies grew after World War II, nations were told they were becoming independent, free from colonial rule, free to trade, free to grow. But behind the scenes, a new empire was forming, an empire without borders, flags, or armies. This empire had new institutions, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the World Bank, and later, the Bank for International Settlements, BIS, a quiet powerhouse connecting the world's central banks. These organizations claimed to stabilize economies, but their tools were loans with conditions. Whenever a country fell into crisis, the same pattern repeated. Loans came with strings attached: austerity, privatization, deregulation. And just like that, the trap expanded beyond borders. Countries that borrowed became locked into a system where debt dictated policy, where economic sovereignty was traded for financial stability. But remember, behind institutions are people, boards, executives, and shareholders. And many of these links trace back to the same legacy of private influence that began with those early banking dynasties. When the United States abandoned the gold standard in 1971, the dollar should have collapsed. After all, it was no longer backed by anything real, but instead, it got stronger. How? By creating a new kind of backing: oil. In secret deals during the 1970s, the US struck an agreement with major oil-producing nations. Oil would only be sold in US dollars. In return, America would provide security, both military and political. This single move gave birth to the petrodollar system, and it changed the world. Now, every country needed US dollars to buy oil, which meant they had to trade, borrow, and save in dollars. Demand for the dollar skyrocketed, and the US could print as much as it wanted without immediate consequences. It was a masterstroke, an invisible tax on the entire planet, because when America printed more dollars, the rest of the world paid for it through inflation and debt. And once again, the same financial families and institutions that managed global credit flows were there, facilitating, investing, and profiting. Fast forward to today. You might think that you have financial freedom. You choose your job, your bank, your investments. But look closer. Every transaction, every loan, every digital payment passes through a system owned by the same few layers of control: central banks, corporate conglomerates, and investment giants. 3 major asset management firms, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, now collectively own large stakes in almost every major corporation on Earth. banks, energy, food, tech, even media. Different names, same shareholders. So while it seems like there's competition, in reality, there's consolidation. And that's how power sustains itself, not by fighting openly, but by quietly owning everything. Governments change, presidents come and go, but the financial architecture stays the same. And at the core of that architecture are private entities that answer to no voters, no borders, and no constitutions. That's the modern face of the trap. Now, a new transformation is underway. Physical money is disappearing. Cash is being replaced with digital payments, online wallets, and central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. It's being sold as progress, convenience, and safety. But behind the marketing lies a new level of control, because once money becomes fully digital, every transaction can be tracked, traced, and even blocked. Imagine a future where your money isn't just numbers in an account. It is permission, and permission can be revoked. Central banks and private tech firms are racing to create this new digital framework, a blend of finance and surveillance. They promise security, but what they're really building is a programmable economy where freedom depends on compliance. The irony? It's the same system, just upgraded for the 21st century. The same control that began with gold loans and paper notes now hides inside apps and algorithms. So what can ordinary people do in a system like this? You can't fight what you don't understand. And that's the first step, understanding how the trap works. The truth is, this system survives because most people never question it. They work, borrow, consume, and repeat. Debt keeps them chasing. Interest keeps them running. But history shows one thing clearly. Every empire built on debt eventually faces collapse. From Rome to Spain, from Britain to the modern US, and the pattern repeats. When the debt can no longer grow, the system resets. And those who saw it coming, those who understood it, rebuild from the ashes. So next time you see the markets rise or fall, when you hear about inflation, debt ceilings, or stimulus packages, remember this. You're not just watching the economy. You're watching a centuries-old design continue to evolve. The faces may change, the technology may advance, but the blueprint remains the same. A few families, and now their institutions, built the foundations of a system that feeds on debt, rewards control, and punishes independence. But awareness is the first form of resistance. If you've made it this far, I want to know your thoughts. Do you think the global financial trap was an accident? Or was it part of the plan all along? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story opened your eyes, don't forget to subscribe, because the next video will reveal how the next financial reset is already being prepared. Right now.